Yeah, and as Sir Roger says, I'm going to be talking about seeing nature anew. And you might wonder where this fits in with the Bodhisattva ideal, which is the Buddhist life expressed in explicitly altruistic terms. So thus our theme title, Compassion for a Modern World. But more about that shortly. I wanted to start just by remembering being out in nature, actually. The memory that came to mind was being out walking with my partner in Wales. We were out there for a week walking the Pembrokeshire Coast Path, very, very beautiful part of Wales. And we were blessed with a week of sun. Can you imagine that in Wales, of all things? Actually, that's not quite true. When we just started walking, there was a kind of smattering of rain, that lovely sort of light rain, and then it disappeared until the end of the week. And we were walking, we were camping, and we didn't know where we were going to camp each night. So we were sort of we'd sort of left the known world behind in some way, and we just sort of entered into this world which was blue for miles and miles to our left, and green for miles and miles to our right, and blue overhead. Quite sort of wonderful experience. We saw all sorts of animals. At one point we saw seals. Seals came and sort of blessed us with their presence. They kind of popped up in the sea. It's amazing, isn't it, being greeted by wild animals? It sort of does feel like a kind of blessing, a surprise, and to be met by something so wild, it can almost feel like a sort of blessing in our sort of known accountable world. So it was lovely kind of seeing these animals, and then we got to the end. Walked for about sort of 5-6 days. Can't quite remember. We got to the end, and we thought, oh, we could get another day in. So we got on the bus, and we travelled back to the start point where there was this really beautiful day that we could do a little bit more of. Basically, we could sort of extend it a little bit further. And it was really fascinating because as we got on the bus, I could feel something tangibly draining away from me. Very, very strange experience. What was that? But it was so tangible. It was like that world was draining away. And a new world, or rather the old world, my old world, was sort of re-emerging meter by meter. We only travelled for 30 minutes, but by the time we got off, I was in a different world. It was sort of that tangible. It was as though, so tangible, it's like if I'd looked out the back of the bus, I would have been able to see that world sort of splashing out of the bottom of the bus, kind of onto the road, if you see what I mean. It was quite sort of tangible experience, and it really made me think. But it happened so quickly. And we did go on to walk, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. It was the fact that we'd been sort of immersed in nature that had made the difference. We got back onto public transport, back into the sort of technological world, and then my experience of nature was different. So isn't that really interesting? It's like it's not merely the conditions of nature. It's not really merely the sort of physical beauty. Something else had kind of changed in me, such that I was sort of perceiving the world and my relationship to it differently. And just by getting on a bus, that changed. Really, really sort of fascinating experience. I've not experienced it so starkly before. So what are those two worlds? Why was it that I was experiencing those two worlds in such a sort of marked kind of way? Why did it shift so quickly? And what's the relevance of that to us? Is it just relevant for nature lovers? Well, no, it's got much more relevance to it than that. But obviously the world I was moving into is sort of our known world, isn't it? It's our known, advanced, sophisticated, technological world. It's a wonder that we can get on a bus and travel at the drop of a hat where we would like. So our known world, with all its sort of all its facilities, all its sort of extraordinary achievements, that was the world that I was sort of entering into. So yeah, what is going on there? Why is it that we can experience the world in such a sort of markedly different sort of way? Well, last night, myself and Arthasiddhi were watching a program, a documentary called Chemistry of Volatile History, partly because I was thinking about this talk. It's really fascinating, actually. It's a good little documentary. It starts in the alchemical sort of era. So it's sort of pre-chemistry, and it's so based in the sort of Greek notion that there are 4 basic elements. And there's this alchemist who is he is trying to discover gold from urine. Yep, you heard that right. He's trying to discover gold from urine. And he's doing that on the basis of it having a golden color. That is what he's trying to do. And he's doing that because there's this prevalent view that the body is a microcosm of the world, basically. So all of the sort of contents of the world, therefore gold, is also somehow in the body. Isn't that an extraordinary view? Kind of really weird view. And gradually through the documentary, we chart the process of chemistry's discoveries. Quite extraordinary process to kind of chart. And what I noticed was I started to relax, you know, that really weird view of the world that we started with. I started to kind of relax. Phew, we're kind of entering into a kind of normal, the real world, the scientific world. I started to relax, and I started to relax because that is the view of the world that I have grown up into. That is normality for me. But what we forget is that science is simply it's simply kind of a way of accounting for how the universe operates. That's what science is actually doing. It's accounting. It's a way of accounting for the way the universe operates. Yeah. We go further than that and think that it's true because it can account for the way the world operates. We think it therefore is the world. It is true. A genuine scientist would never claim that. A genuine scientist would be saying, actually, this is just a theory that accounts for the way the world operates. And because we've learned how to account for the way the world operates, the known world, in all its sort of extraordinary technological advance, has emerged. So the world that we live in stands as a confirmation of that account of reality. We believe in it because when we get on a bus, it says, look what we have achieved. And we have achieved that because of this scientific account of the world. So our world sort of confirms an account of the world. But what's really interesting about that is if we move forward in the scientific project to quantum physics, we get into uncomfortable territory again, the sort of similar discomfort to the alchemical territory. We find that actually quantum physics says that actually matter does not behave as matter. It says that the way we observe it actually influences the way it behaves. Isn't that weird? So that really unsettles our settled assumption of the known world, the accountable world, and the world that we live in. So actually, all that sort of comfortable territory is an account of things that doesn't actually marry up to what modern science finds, that we are comfortable with. Yeah, so that is the known world. That's the known world to us. That's the world which we live in. It's an unsettling thing to consider, isn't it? But that's what science is saying, and that's what Buddhism is saying too. We, of course, go further, and we get into sort of a certain sort of dogmatism and say that no, it is true. These are the elements, and the world is made up of 92 of them, and that's what's true. Science has not said that. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But yeah, so where are we going from here? Yeah, so Buddhism, the Buddhist view is closer to nuclear physics than the sort of Newtonian, you could say Newtonian scientific view, our general sort of scientific worldview. Buddhism too questions whether matter is the primary reality, in the same way that quantum physics is saying, no, actually, it depends on how you look at it as to how it behaves. So Buddhism would say that actually consciousness is the primary reality within which matter sort of manifests. Now, isn't that an extraordinary view? It's kind of quite mind-bending to sort of see the world in that sort of way, quite unsettling. But as I'm saying, just because it's unsettling doesn't mean that it's not true or not a helpful way to see things. But why? Why would we bend our imaginations to see the world in this new kind of way? Why is that important? So the reason why it's important is because of the human tendency to draw a line between a kind of living me and a not living not me. So that is the human tendency, and that is what we're going to kind of do somewhere, wherever that line is. So we kind of we make this distinction between what is living and what is me, broadly speaking, and what is not living and not me, and therefore we can use to our own ends. Yeah, it's dead. Therefore, we can do what we want with it. There is going to be a line drawn somewhere. At different times in history, it's been drawn in different places. Of course, in a certain way, it gets drawn in between humans and animals, doesn't it? The way animals are used, we might not argue that they're not living, but we treat them as though they're not living in a certain way. There's a line being drawn there. It's an arbitrary line. The line has actually been drawn closer to us. It's been drawn through the human race at certain times in history. So we've got this capacity to draw a line. And that is why our view of nature and the world is so important. What Buddhism is saying is that no, in some ways, actually, on the other side of that line, well, in fact, it's saying that line doesn't really exist. It's saying that there is a continuity between self and world, and there is simply a kind of patterning of consciousness, actually, that runs as a continuity kind of from the subjective pole to the world, the objective pole. So we can't actually draw that line and say this is not important or we can use this. It's actually, it goes so far as to say that the world is not dead. It's not dead matter. It is in some way sort of living. That's kind of quite a stretch for us, isn't it? It's really quite a stretch within our modern sort of modern scientific or not so modern, not quite up to date, but modern scientific sort of world view. And I think perhaps at a views level, it's a bit sort of hard to grapple with, but this is where nature comes in. But I just want to make clear that actually the views that we bring to the world create then our experience of the world and inform the way we behave in relationship to it. The advances of science have created a worldview in which the whole world is kind of accountable. We can account for the whole world. It's all sort of explicable. And its basis is dead matter. Therefore, we can do what we want with it. Out of that, we know what has emerged. I'm not dismissing the value of science in any way. I don't think we need to do that. I think we can include it. But we can see how the view has actually worked out in quite disastrous ways for the planet. So, yeah, we draw this line somewhere, and Buddhism is saying that line is a mistake. So what do we do about this? This is where nature comes in. So for us, the idea that stainless steel and plastic bags is somehow living seems a bit far out, a bit far-fetched, isn't it? A bit sort of fanciful. And I think there is a danger that we do sort of add a sort of a slightly sentimentalized view of the world being alive. We sort of try to repopulate it with old gods and goddesses. You know, there may be some value to that, but there's a danger of kind of sentimentalizing it. I don't think that's ever going to have much of an effect on people's, very broadly speaking, on people's view of the world and behavior in it. Yeah, there's the nature is different, isn't it? Nature was drawing me into a different relationship with the world. That's its capacity. With nature, we can feel directly that there's something else there that's alive. We can resonate with it. When you are immersed in it, it draws you out into a different experience of the world and a different experience of yourself. We don't need to sort of think about it. It's a direct experience. So this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit, this capacity or opportunity that nature affords us to enter into a different way of relating to the world, a sort of natural empathy. Because this can be the basis of ethics. In fact, Sangha very, very interestingly says sort of is the basis. It's a necessary basis for Western Buddhists to ethics. So he says, in a way, you might start with a kind of self-interested basis for ethics, but that's got its limits. What we can move on to is a basis of ethics which is based in a kind of natural feeling for life, a natural resonance for life, and then you could say, moving further on, there is the bodhisattva, that kind of this a sort of spontaneous empathy. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but yeah, an example of this, just to make it accessible, is becoming vegetarian. So for me, I became vegetarian because of Buddhism. I was basically, the idea was put forward to me that maybe it wasn't working for me so well to eat animals when I didn't really believe that was a very good thing to do. Maybe kind of putting myself through my actions in a kind of compromised position wasn't so good for me. I'd never heard that idea before. It was all about being good. And I wasn't sure that I was good, so that didn't kind of convince me to me. I wasn't sure enough that I was good. I thought I was bad or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, that idea of kind of self-interested ethics, actually maybe it doesn't work for me to act in ways that I'm not really very proud of. I wouldn't really sort of, they're quite contradictory. You know, I wouldn't want to kill an animal myself. Maybe that's not going to be so good for me. So that got me to the stage of maybe I could have a look at this and become a vegetarian. Actually, the experience of becoming a vegetarian, I was actually just coming down from E. I was about 20, I think, at the time, and I'd not done a lot of drugs, but I was just coming down from E, half an E actually, the only half E that I've ever taken. But I was kind of highly sensitized, and I was making myself some dinner. There was this fish, and I took one look at it in this sort of heightened sensitivity, and it looked back at me. You know, when you buy a fish, it's whole, isn't it? It's a whole. It's to all intents and purposes could still be alive. That was immediately apparent to me. That was the last thing. That was it. That was the end of meat eating for me. Now I find that well, I've become largely vegan actually, but it's not something that's a discipline. It's more something. It's a pleasure actually. It's a pleasure for me to feel that sense of connection with the animal world, uncompromised. So that's the sort of basis really for me of being a vegetarian and a vegan. It stems from a kind of an empathy for life, which I value much more than the taste of meat. Actually, a whole load of corn products that are very good taste as well, so that helps a lot. But yeah, so that's a little example of moving from this sort of self-interested ethics, which is really, really valuable and important, to an ethics which is based in a kind of natural feeling for life, a natural resonance. And it's nature that can give us a flavor for this. It's when we're in nature. It's when it's often, I think, when when we grow up in nature, we feel for the planet. We feel for the natural world. Well, that is really, really important as a basis of ethics. Obviously, on an environmental level, actually, I'm saying also at a human level as well. We need to resonate, feel the life in other human beings too. So just to start to wrap up, yeah, I'm saying that actually there are certain views which we feel comfortable with because we've grown up with, but we actually start to take them dogmatically. And what we can do is start to engage more imaginatively with the physical world, the world around us. What is it? Open up to the sort of wonder of it, acknowledge that the view we have of it is a view, and see if we can actually sort of, well, as Sangha actually puts it, rediscover this natural empathy, which is perhaps sort of lost in our societies. Perhaps Nyona Barcher talked about it very movingly, actually, in more traditional societies. Yeah, but it's something that we can rediscover, and that is the base. That is a basis. That is the basis for ethics. So yes, in a way, the whole project of science, it's very, very important to us as Westerners, isn't it? It comes. I was reading Karen Armstrong. She says it comes from the Greek impulse, and she says actually that it was a spiritual impulse for insight into the nature of the world around us. I found that really interesting, that it's a sort of spiritual impulse, but it's led to scientific discovery. And in the process, the account that science bequeaths us has become the known world to us. And as I say, it's an accountable world. Science can account for everything, or at least we think it can. As I was saying, modern science takes us beyond that, but we're left in this sort of this accountable world. Science says that it can account for everything, and that is a bit of a kind of dull world. It's a bit of a problematic world in some ways. But one thing about this sort of this world in which everything can be accounted for, in some ways, that supports self-interest. It might seem like a bit of a leap, but self-interest is if we act out of self-interest, it's kind of accountable in the sense of we can sort of be accounted for as human beings. So this is the basis of our economy. Actually, the economy doesn't work if people are generous. It's no longer predictable what is going to happen. Economics sort of, apparently, I don't know loads about it, but apparently it sort of breaks down if people start being generous. Self-interest is the basis of exchange, isn't it? If I give you something, well, then I'm going to want something back. We can all understand that. That's based in kind of self-interest. It makes the world and human behavior accountable, yeah? And this is the world that we kind of live in. We live in a world in which human behavior is accountable, and it's what's it called? It's lowest common factor. Is that the right way of putting it? Is self-interest. That's the sort of basis of it. It creeps into our acts of generosity even. Back at home in the community, Arthasiddhi is cooking, baking us loads of bread, actually, which is brilliant. And then I start thinking, oh, well, maybe I could do something like that. Often our generosity is well, perhaps I'll say, you know, what would happen if Arthasiddhi stopped doing that? Would I stop cooking, baking bread as well? Often our sort of generosity is a little bit sort of based in exchange, isn't it? Would we continue? Would we be so generous? It's a very, very telling moment. Can we kind of continue to be generous when the generosity is not returned? And this is what the Bodhisattva is telling us. It's telling us, it's saying, no, actually, there is more to human nature than is accountable. It's saying there is something unaccountable that's inherent in the very nature of human consciousness, saying that there's something sort of unlimited. That is what the Bodhisattva is kind of telling us. So this is what Viryajyoti, borrowing the words of Sangharakshita, talked about, saying the Bodhisattva can love where there is no reason to love, can be happy where there's no reason for happiness, can be creative where there is no possibility of creativity. Actually, this sort of accountable world kind of limits and restricts our vision of who we are. The Bodhisattva is rectifying that. The Bodhisattva is reminding us what human nature really is, fully realized. Yeah. So the reason why this is important is because if we look at the scale of the problem of our planetary sort of environmental situation, actually, I think our view of humanity is not enough. It's not enough just to be kind of good people in this sort of self-interested kind of way. Humanism is not going to be enough. We need a vision of humanity. We need a vision of a sort of personal vision that taps us into the deeper resources, unaccountable resources. And So we need a vision, but we also, it needs not to be sort of pie in the sky. It can be discovered in experience. So a little example for me that came to mind when I was thinking about this was when I first moved to Cambridge. I didn't have many friends. I was just getting to know people. I'd find myself sort of getting to know friends, and I'd be in that sort of, you know, that territory where you're thinking, yeah, okay, you've been talking for quite a while now. I hope you realize, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, I am listening, but we do both realize that it's my turn now, you know. No, I hear what no, yeah, but it's, you know, we do understand this. There's a kind of unconscious kind of, well, it's exchange again, isn't it? And I remember this kind of coming up. I think perhaps when we're getting to know people anew, it's more sort of tangible. It's more, it pushes itself upon you more forcibly, that sort of state. But yeah, I realized coming away from conversations like that it wasn't working for me either. Actually, I was trying to sort of meter out, you know, well, your part and my part and stuff. But then I was sort of left unsatisfied by the nature of the communication. I was left feeling actually that person had something to talk about that I sort of interrupted. And I'm actually more interested in kind of finding out about that myself. And in this way, it was just a little glimpse that self-interest is not, it's not our deeper nature. There is a deeper, a deeper possibility within consciousness that is actually more satisfying. It's more satisfying because it's more true, it's more real, it's closer to our nature. So we can kind of glimpse the sort of the possibility of an unaccountable kind of kindness, an unaccountable love, loving where there is no need, no reason to love. And that's really what the world in its problems needs. That the environmental situation is stemming from a world squarely based in self-interest. It needs an example of something new, and that is really what Buddhism and the Sangha is kind of trying to do. So I'm going to finish there, but I hope I've sort of made clear what Buddhism has to say about in relation to our sort of modern scientific account of the world, and how that tends us to draw this line and the consequences of that, and the possibility of nature drawing us into or helping us rediscover a natural feeling for empathy, and the importance of having a vision. I think that natural feeling in itself is not enough. There needs to be a deeper vision of what humanity is in order to motivate us to move beyond the inherent pull of self-interest.